Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Cook Inlet Tug and Barge is a marine transportation company specializing in harbor services with a primary marketing focus on the Port of Anchorage, providing their customers with quality-based service specifically tailored to their needs.
Indie Alaska is an innovative weekly web series capturing the diverse and colorful lifestyle of Alaskans. Real stories of everyday Alaskans at work and play. Supported in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company.
The National Weather Service.
And good Monday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 30th of March. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your latest weather information online. You can do that easily by going to weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. And a lot of this information, if it isn't already, will be even more easily available on your cellular device. And that means a lower bill at a faster time checking out the information where you are, whether that's sitting in your office in Bethel or just dialing it up on the road when you're heading out to the airport. Pretty easy stuff. Weather info line at 800-472-0391. You can find us on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube, of course. And if you're watching us on Twitter, you probably got some alerts from the NWS Fairbanks crew earlier today about some warm weather records that have been achieved. Anchorage tied the high at 49 today. The previous was 1995. There's been several warm days in a row here, but Fairbanks hit 50 degrees for the 9th time in March. They've had 13 days of 45 degrees or warmer, the most since 1926, so it has been pretty warm up there in Fairbanks for sure. And in the meantime, not so nice, blizzard warnings and blowing snow up on the North Slope, and you can see those warnings across the Beaufort Seacoast there. Blizzard warnings around the eastern Beaufort, and then winter weather advisories for areas from Barrow eastward. Again, the one around the northern Arctic coast, including Barrow and Atkasuk, will diminish as we go into the evening hours, but we expect the winter weather advisory and the blizzard warning to continue as we go through tonight and into tomorrow morning, and probably through a good chunk of the daytime tomorrow. So again, not so nice and gnarly conditions up there across the Arctic coast for tonight. Out across the west, we are still watching the wave train of atmospheric pain moving across the North Pacific. A lot of this is staying well to the south of the Aleutians here. So the main storm track just out of reach of most of Alaska. What happens then is just as if you took a ball and kind of rolled your hand under it, it would create that spin. Well, in this case, the spin is over here and nothing is pushing that spinning round of air really out of the way. So we are still in the same pattern as when you and I talked last time. So here's what's going on. We've got one storm system well south of the Aleutians. You can see a weaker circulation here right around the western chain of Alaska. Another batch of moisture will try and swing northward. There are some gales out here, but by and large, the weather is pretty status quo for March. And as we get into the Gulf of Alaska, take a look at this. You can see a lot of dry air wrapped up into the system here across the central Gulf. Let's look at southeastern Alaska. Another wave of moisture is zipping up the Pacific Northwestern coastline and through central and southern parts of southeast. This has been a rain producer for Sitka and for Yakutat and for areas out across a good chunk of southeast. Got a pretty good soaker today. In many areas, they're anywhere from a ½ inch to as much as 2/3 of an inch of rainfall. And some of that was extending its way into Prince William Sound as well. Cordova got a good soaker through the afternoon hours. But on the western and northern side of this, there's still plenty of cold, but it's a pretty sharp cutoff there around the Yukon Valley and points north, seeing hold in the last holds of winter. Anywhere southward is starting to already get a pretty decent taste of springtime across the region. Now, as the conditions start to change in the next several days, as we head toward Wednesday and Thursday, instead of this northerly flow across a good chunk of the central and eastern Bering Sea, we're going to start to see more of a southerly flow, and that's going to start to really shift around some of the ice conditions here, especially across the northern and the central Bering Sea coast. So if you're out there on the water, you're out there on the coast, you have plans to move through or over some of the ice in the coming days, it'll be time to start watching those ice conditions there, as southerly winds will start to develop across a good chunk of the western coastline and the central and northern Bering Sea, especially over some of that thicker ice pack. So watch for changes there. Here's a look at today's weather map. Here's our low across southeast, a 991 millibar low there. Again, this frontal boundary is working up through the north. Saw some gustier winds around Ketchikan and Annette earlier today. Some of that may have diminished already. Annette made it up to around 50 degrees this afternoon, even with the rain and the wind through the region. Areas around eastern Prince William Sound saw some light rainfall earlier today. Cordova picked up about 1/3 of an inch of rain, and there's our low pressure system out in the middle of the Gulf. Got a lot of dry air around it, not a whole lot else except for a few convective clouds there. Out across the YK Delta, periods of light snow were falling there, mainly snow showers, really nothing much to write home about as we know. 998 millibar low there with some light rainfall around Bristol Bay. The northwestern coastline was looking at some light snow. Also down into the Kotzebue Sound region. Kotzebue saw temperatures that were a little bit on the chilly side today, only about 2 degrees there, and blowing snow around parts of the Arctic coast. Again, that with a blizzard warning and winter weather advisories all the way west out toward Barrow. The next wave or low pressure system working across the central chain at 1,001 millibars. Again, not a terribly deep system at all, and that front will continue to track eastward. And as it does so, this will probably end up being the most powerful system on the map. Again, we'll use the air quotes, powerful, as we go through tonight and tomorrow. It's really not a huge storm, but there may be some gales with it. And it is grabbing in some of the last bits of cold air across the Bering Sea. So with that, we get a little bit of snow for the central and western chain, as well as areas out toward the Alaska Peninsula. Better chance that that is going to mix in with some rainfall in many places tonight. That includes Dutch Harbor and Unalaska, so don't be surprised to see that wintry mix for your area. Light rain for southeast will continue, as well as the continual area of low pressure in the Gulf that is just sitting here and spinning. We did this all last week, and I want to say the week before, I'm going to keep doing this until this system moves. It's just going to sit here and go around and around and around because the jet stream is way down here, so nothing's really kicking this into western Canada or the Pacific Northwest. In the meantime, the lower Yukon, middle Yukon Valley, as well as the Kobuk and Noatak valleys and up toward the interior of the Kotzebue Sound region. Still looking at some snow showers there as upper level trough is kind of sitting right about here. That is also helping to encourage the cold air to move quickly across the northern coast. With that, blowing snow conditions will reduce visibility as we go through Tuesday. Again, those blizzard warnings up until at least tomorrow afternoon for the eastern Beaufort Seacoast. Low pressure across the eastern Gulf will keep sloshing in moisture here across southeast, and the higher terrain, that's probably snow. For the Chilkoot and White Pass region, those snow levels will probably descend to about 1,000, 1,300 feet or so. So if you're flying tomorrow, watch for that to develop, and then those conditions will probably drop a little bit more as we go through the daytime. So watch for past visibility to change there around Chilkoot and White Pass through the day. Now for Prince William Sound, rain showers around the Seward Coast of the Kenai Mountains. Expect some rain showers throughout the day. Anything that we see around Cook Inlet, at worst right now, looks to be showery in nature. A few drops from the mountains here or there. That's really probably about it. Out across the west, rain and snow showers will be possible. As you get closer to the Yukon, a better chance that will mix in with rain throughout the day, and snow showers for Kotzebue Sound and northward toward the Chukchi Seacoast. For the central and eastern Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula, low pressure will still be spinning slowly toward the western Gulf, being drawn into this gyre we see here across the Gulf. At 992 millibars, it will have some rain with it through the Alaska Peninsula and out toward the central Aleutians. And ahead of that, a chance that they'll see some rain and snow mixing in. As we get into Wednesday, low pressure works itself into the Gulf now and starts to fall apart as we see systems do this, wrapping this big purple line around it. That's an occlusion and a sign that the cold and the warm's all mixing up in on itself. So this won't last a whole lot longer, but as this boundary is still with us, it still provides a little bit more of a focus for some rainfall or clouds to develop, and it will start to bring in some more drier air. So again, the system is dying when we see it look like this. We have drier air out ahead of this for areas in southeast, so rain is still a possibility, but it should start to diminish in its coverage there across southeast as we get into the midweek. Rain and snow showers for areas around Prince William Sound, and for south central, more of cloud cover than anything else that has any bite to it. Snow showers may be possible for the Talkeetnas and some areas northward, but again, that should be minimal. And blowing snow for the Arctic coast, and mainly around Kaktovik and points eastward is where we'll see the strongest winds, but that too looks like it will diminish a little bit as we get into Wednesday afternoon. In the meantime, those big changes out in the Bering Sea, look at this, a 1,024 millibar high. That's a decent high pressure system, something we can talk about for a minute, as it's forcing northerly winds down the western coast. On the other side is the return flow. So we know that air around high pressure rotates in a clockwise fashion, and that means on this side the air is moving up from south to north, and with that we'll bring that southerly warmer wind from the Pacific and eventually start to change some of the ice conditions fairly quickly across the central and northern Bering Sea. So again, if you're out in the Bering, watch for rapidly changing ice conditions there across the central and northern sections there. We're already seeing that across Southwest, and we've certainly seen that across South Central and the Cook Inlet region. We'll talk about that when we get to your sea ice outlook here in just a few minutes. 40s and 50s for Southeast today, 50 up in Hyder, 54 around Haines, a beautiful day there. 40s and 50s for many areas in Southeast, a wet and soggy day in Sitka, but nothing out of the ordinary. Upper 40s around Haida Gwaii and the southern side of the Dixon entrance there. Petersburg, Wrangell, Heidelberg, all pleasantly mild and a little blustery and probably fairly wet throughout your day. 30s and 40s for a good chunk of Prince William Sound. Portage was 39, 44. Looked like the day in Seward today, 46 in Kenai, about the same in Anchorage after temperatures warmed up a little bit earlier this afternoon, again tying that record high for the day. 48 in Talkeetna, 42 in Glen Ellen and around Gulkena, 43 in Northway with 47 in Eagle. Fairbanks today saw temperatures again up in the upper 40s. Many surrounding areas were probably in the lower 50s, so an unusually warm March for you, as we talked about earlier in the show. Fort Yukon was 28, and AKwx Pass hit 25 with Arctic Village at 21. And for the Arctic coast itself, temps were a lot closer to zero, and with the wind blowing around, noticeable wind chills there and reduction in visibility for Kaktovik. Areas for Kotzebue Sound saw temps from 5 below to 5 above, with Point Hope and Point Lay a little bit milder than that. Kotzebue was looking at 4 below. Unalakleet was 10 above, with Bethel at 25, McGrath 45 degrees. Southwestern Alaska in the 30s and 40s, with King Salmon at 40 degrees, 41 in Dillingham. The Alaska Peninsula saw temperatures in the upper 30s and lower 40s. Sand Point was closer to 40 degrees this afternoon. Cold Bay and False Pass were both in the upper 30s. Lower 40s in Kodiak Island, and low 20s for both St. Paul and St. George, with the central and western chain in the mid to upper 30s. Now, as we move on to your flying weather and temperatures, we'll notice that warm air is going to be a predominant theme here. Overnight lows in the 20s and 30s for Southwest and the interior, with South Central at or just below freezing. Southeast in the 30s and 40s. The Arctic coast from 5 to 10 below, with areas in Southwest in the 20s and 30s closer to freezing there. But high temps jump right back up to 40 tomorrow. Mid to upper 40s for the interior. South Central in the mid 40s there, and mild, and mid to upper 40s for Southeast. Now the West Coast will be a little bit different, still in that northerly flow across the Seward Peninsula. Nome only 15. Areas toward the Nunivak Island region and the YK Delta in the teens and 20s. St. Lawrence Island 13 and 5 above for Nome. Now watch for the reductions in visibility to be focused around precipitation tomorrow. Some of that again could be around Chilkoot and White Pass. Pockets in the Gulf of Alaska will see hit and miss IFR, as well as areas west of the Alaska Range. But watch for a good chunk of VFR conditions across Cook Inlet and northward up the Susitna Valley. IFR conditions around Eagle and southward, that improves. Northern areas will see mainly focus on that reduction in visibility for the Beaufort Seacoast. So watch for blizzard conditions here, and again probably hit and miss IFR along the coast. Otherwise VFR south of the Bering Strait to about the Pribilofs, otherwise MVFR for the southern Bering Sea. Your pass conditions show MVFR conditions for AKwx Pass, probably VFR for Adigan Pass for your Tuesday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass will say MVFR conditions through most of your day tomorrow. Rainy Pass looking like going to see some improvements through the day. Windy Pass we expect MVFR. Isabel Pass should trend that way during your Tuesday, but starting out at VFR. Mentasta Pass looks a little bit worse in the morning, but improvements should be had by late in the day. MVFR conditions there. Tanita Pass, MVFR conditions during the afternoon and through the morning. Portage Pass also looking at marginal restrictions. And Chilkoot and White Pass we think will turn over toward IFR as the ceilings and the visibility drop as snow showers set in around 1 to 1,300 feet. Freezing levels show that warmer air across the Gulf has been spread out a lot, so it's not as focused or concentrated across the central and eastern Gulf at this point. The surface freezing line up across the higher train of southeast and pretty much right along the Gulf Coast into the west and now north of the Aleutians. So what does that mean for icing potential? Well, above 5,000 feet for the eastern Gulf and northern sections of southeast, you'll probably see some light to maybe isolated moderate. Across the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula, False Pass, Cold Bay, all the way out to Nikolsky, I should say, and southward above 4,000 feet. Now across areas a little bit further inland, up the river along the Yukon toward Galena and Ruby, and into the western Brooks Range from about 1,000 feet to as high as 4,000 feet is where you'll find some light to isolated moderate threat there. As I was talking about the jet stream, this is the position I was talking about. It's well south of Alaska, even south of the Aleutians at this point. So as it comes out of Asia at 125 knots, it's crossing an area of ocean that really never dramatically impacts Alaska. So any disturbances we have are pretty much just meandering here in the eddies of the atmospheric river and really not moving on their merry way. So our weather pattern is not terribly progressive at this point. We have southerly winds across the west coast, and here are those northerly winds. As this pattern shifts a little bit more, we'll keep the western coast in the cold and keep most of the Gulf in the fairly mild south and westerly air. Wind speeds across the interior are pretty light, around 10 knots or so. And here's our stronger easterly flow impacting the Arctic coast right now. You can see that's mirrored at 3,000 feet. We still have a light southerly flow coming up the south and western coast all the way up the western Brooks Range. And here are the northerly winds. They're 10 to 15 knots or so, still pretty light across the central chain. A much stronger flow, though, south of Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, around 50 knots. A lot of this, though, won't get a whole lot further north. And for southeast, wind speeds anywhere from 20 to 30 knots across the southern and eastern side of this low. Most areas are experiencing fairly light winds at this point. As far as turbulence goes, we expect the greatest impacts to be across the north slope tomorrow below 5,000 feet. Some of that will easily reach isolated moderate with a strong gust upwards of 50 miles per hour. Some of that, though, will be limited to the areas around Kaktovik, maybe as far west as Prudhoe Bay and Dutch Harbor. Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse is where I'm trying to go. Below 6,000 feet for the Alaska Peninsula, and then west of Nikolsky, also looking at some light to isolated moderate chop. Most other areas will not be experiencing a tremendous amount of threat from turbulence through your Tuesday. That's a look at your aviation forecast. In just a few moments, we'll be back with a look at sea ice and, of course, the rest of your marine weather. Stay tuned.
Good evening. I'm Harry Keeling, and on behalf of Alaska Public Media and the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation, welcome to Hangar Flat. Our guest this evening is Dean Eichholz. Dean's been on the program a number of times. He's a very well-respected CFI and DPE. He's also the treasurer of the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation. Dean flew A6s in the Navy. Thanks for your service.
Thank you.
Came to Alaska in 1983 and became a DPE in 1987. What we want to talk about today is kind of draw on his experiences as a DPE, as we're maybe cover some trends and check rides that he's flown recently, and maybe any thoughts he might have on the upcoming and long-awaited summer flying season. Dean, welcome.
Thank you.
So as a DPE, do you see anything new, any new trends or anything you'd like to emphasize to the audience?
Well, the trends seem to always stay fairly much the same. Airspace is always a big problem for the applicants, and it doesn't matter whether it's a commercial instrument or private somehow. They all seem not to have a good grasp of the airspace when it comes in for a flight check.
Let me ask you something on that. Do you think that's a case of just not flying in airspace that requires more attention, not knowing how to, or just not studying, or all of the above?
It can be all of the above. When I see where they've done their previous cross countries and it all goes around Anchorage's airspace or misses all controlled airspace, you know that, yeah, they're purposely not planning on flying into that airspace. But at times, I mean, that's one of the big problems up here is violations in controlled airspace, and it's one of the big problems. I also do check rides for 135 operators some, and the big weakness has to do, and the violations for the air taxi operators a lot of times come from airspace violations. So it is a...
So it sounds to me like, particularly when someone's coming up for a private or commercial, the CFI bears a lot of that responsibility to introduce them and challenge them in airspace. Would you agree with that?
I agree wholeheartedly on that. They need to understand all of the airspace. I mean, we have a lot of military operations areas. We have restricted airspace up here, and pilots a lot of times don't understand what all of that means to them, other than that they think they're avoiding it by staying either lower to the ground or flying right near that airspace. But they need to understand what that is, and especially when the weather gets bad, What happens is when it becomes lower, below basic VFR?
What about stick and rudder skills? Any trends there? Landings, takeoffs, crosswind landings? What?
Crosswind landings are always one that becomes a challenge for the pilots on check rides on that particular part. You know, the basic air work, a lot of them do pretty well. I still think more emphasis needs to be done on working with students. Not all of the instructors do a bad job on that, but on stalls is what I'm speaking of. They're a little weak on the min-controllable airspeed, the stall recoveries, and understanding the locations where you could get into a stall. We can do the stalls up there at altitude, and then they come back in their Super Cub into a traffic pattern for me, and they're staring at the runway as they're making the turn, and I'm watching the airplane skid to the outside of the turn and the airspeed going down. And I think sometimes they miss the emphasis of what that stall practice is all about, where it can occur.
Well, that's so important, and two things come to mind. One is my emphasis on the technologies out there, and that particularly I'm talking about the angle of attack indicators, which I think would help a great deal. But the other thing is, when I fly BFRs, I see people that are afraid to fly basic stalls. And I think that's something we've got to face as a CFI community. We need to teach them how to do that if they've lost confidence. Thoughts on that?
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly. One of the big emphasis areas that I have on folks at the end of a check ride, and that has to do with going out, if you're not current, getting in your airplane and go out and get some altitude and practice slow flight and stalls. Because if you don't, and you go into the pattern and think you're going to just do some touch and goes and get your skills back up, what happens is you're not comfortable flying slow, and they try to fly the approach too fast, and then you see them hopping the airplane down the runway.
Exactly. Wow.
And all they need to do is go and get that confidence up that they can fly the airplane at a slower speed.
Yeah. Dean, thank you for helping to make all of us safer. Thanks for being on the program tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed tonight's program, brought to you by the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation. Hopefully you're a member, and if you're not, please renew for 2015 so we can bring programs like this to you. Until next time, fly safe.
Thanks, Harry. See you again on Friday. Today's sea ice edge continues to remain just north of St. Paul, about 20 to 30 nautical miles or so. And a lot of this has changed just over the course of the weekend there. And also, the ice in Cook Inlet has changed significantly. Now the only ice that we see is north of Calgon Island to just about areas around the Turnagain Arm there. After that, most of that is open water now. So a lot of changes. You can track those anytime online. Today's forecast for tomorrow in southeast shows winds up to 10 to 20 knots across the inner waterways, 15 knots around areas around Frederick Sound and Stevens Passage. 4-foot seas are expected there for the coastal areas. About 8 to 9 foot seas, 11 to 12 foot seas a little bit further south toward Dixon Entrance with 20-knot winds coming in from the south. As we get into Wednesday, you're going to notice some changes there as another wave of low pressure gets a little bit closer to the region. Winds are still light on the inside, 15 knots around Clarence Strait with a 3-foot sea. Southwesterly south of Sitka down toward the Dixon Entrance, 20 to 25 knots, 12 to 14-foot seas there, and still holding on to south and southeasterly flow in the north and eastern Gulf up toward Yakutat and Cross Sound. For south central, winds are still light and variable for most of Prince William Sound, inside and outside. Cook Inlet southward, you'll see very light and generally variable winds until you get to the Barrens, more of a north and westerly flow there at 10 to 15 knots. East of Kodiak Island, a southwesterly flow at 20 knots. For Shelikof Strait, it's 15 knots with a 3-foot sea. Wednesday, the winds pick up and start driving in a little bit more from the east and northeast. Around Prince William Sound, it's 15 knots with 3-foot seas on the inside, 7-foot seas in the northern Gulf. That continues into the areas east of Kenai Peninsula, 25 to 30 knots down toward the Barrens with a 7-foot sea, 8-foot seas down toward Kodiak Island. Northeasterlies inside of Shelikof Strait and northeasterly winds also coming down Cook Inlet at 15 to 20 knots. For the Alaska Peninsula, light winds and small seas inside of Bristol Bay and southeasterly flows south of Sand Point to King Cove with a 7-foot sea. Easterlies north of Cold Bay with a 4-foot sea. By Wednesday, you'll see a north and westerly push across all areas, 20 to 30 knots, 8 to 10-foot seas in the Pacific, and 3 to 7-foot seas on the Bering Sea coast there for Wednesday. North and easterly winds for the central and eastern chain, 25 to 35 knots on the north, up to 40 knots south of Nikolsky and east of Atka. Look for seas ranging up to 12 foot in those areas, with 11-foot seas south of Unalaska and Nikolsky, and northerlies from Kiska to Attu at 20 to 25 knots. Those become southerly on Wednesday, marking the change toward warmer weather blowing into the Bering. Try saying that 5 times fast. West and northwesterly winds for the central and eastern chain, 15 to 25 knots on the north, and seas as high as 6 to 10 feet on the Pacific seacoast as we go into Wednesday in the Aleutians. For the west coast, northerlies coming down St. Lawrence Island, a variable flow around Nunivak Island, and heavy freezing spray may threaten areas south of St. Matthew and south of the ice edge, of course. Northerlies into the Pribilofs with a 4-foot sea there on Tuesday. By Wednesday, we're still looking at 4-foot seas, but winds come up to 20 knots there, and still looking at a north and northwesterly flow coming down the west and southwest coast, 25 knots outside of the Kuskokwim Bay with a 4-foot sea on Wednesday. And for the north coast, it's stronger easterly flow for the areas for the eastern and central Beaufort Seacoast. Tonight, blizzard warnings there from Kaktovik westward, and then once we get into Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse, a winter weather advisory for blowing snow, so the winds and visibility shouldn't be quite so bad there. But watch for those conditions to continue until tonight and tomorrow, and for the west and into Kotzebue Sound, 10 knots there. That'll shift to more of a northwesterly direction on Wednesday, and we still keep some stronger winds across the Arctic coast, but those will start to diminish just a little bit as we get into Wednesday. Speeds there holding around 20 to 30 knots, again, all blowing in from the east. Now, for the rest of tonight's weather across southeastern Alaska, periods of rain will continue there. Look for that to trend northward with time as drier air gets blown into the system, but another wave of low pressure will kind of sweep in as we head into Wednesday. Look for areas of snow showers across the west coast and blowing snow in the north, of course, with the strongest system on the map coming through the Aleutians as that continues to track eastward into the Gulf by Wednesday. The focus on precipitation will be in south and western Alaska and drying up a little bit more in southeast, and areas of blowing snow continue in the north. That's your Alaska weather. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.